Welcome to the Poise podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise.
I think the hardest thing I've had to live with is regret. Most people would look at my life, and I'm not complaining about what I've done or what I haven't done, but there was a part of me that felt like I was failing or I was missing out on something. Mm-hmm. And of course, it's easy to look back and say the shoulda, coulda, woulda's, but it became crippling to me at one point, living with regret. And then, to be quite honest with you, I found myself very confused on, do I have guilt or do I have regret?
That's one thing that I had to recognize too, is that guilt and regret are not the same. Guilt tends to be when you know you did something wrong and you're now feeling bad about it. So you intentionally did something that wasn't right. Whereas regret is you innocently made a decision not knowing the damage or harm that it would do. And now you're regretting those actions.
I see. So one, in essence, is from a negative perspective, meaning you know you've done something wrong, you made a mistake, whatever the case might be. Yeah, like
you're intentionally lying.
Okay.
That, and you feel bad about it after the fact, that's guilt.
Right.
Whereas, let's say you were expressing yourself to me about a situation, and let's say I started crying, and now you kind of feel bad that you made those choice of words. That's more so regret.
Yeah. So what I've definitely been living with, or have dealt with, I should say, is regret.
Okay. And there's 4 types of regrets. So there's foundation, boldness, moral, connection. And I feel like a lot of people tend to deal with either boldness, moral, and connection. Boldness is regretting chances you didn't take. Moral is where you did the wrong thing. So what we just explained, your intentions were good, but you just didn't make the right choice. At least it doesn't seem that way. Connection is more so, for example, you wish you reached out to someone. You wish you showed a family member more love before they passed, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And the most common that people tend to go through are more so wishing that they made more time for loved ones, wishing that they were better to their spouses, wishing that they had taken more risks. So that technically falls under boldness and connection.
That's interesting because listening to those definitions, I think it confirmed to me that we'll always have some type of regret.
I think so too.
You'll always wonder what would have happened if I, gave loved ones more time.
Ultimately, if you made a different choice, like the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, or what if,
But I think the regrets that I have, and I think this is covered under boldness, is it would naturally take me through a different journey of life. And I wonder how many people out there are living with that type of regret. Not that I spent time with my loved ones, but I wish I would spend more time. But things such as, what would have happened if I went to school for something else? Or what would have happened if, I kept the relationship? Those type of regrets are the hardest to live with because you'll truly never know the answer.
That makes sense because you can't really find out the answer. But I feel like that's the same with the connection one too. Sometimes if the person has passed on, you can't really find out.
Yeah.
What's done is kind of done.
I saw that and I related to this personally, and I'm sure many other people will as well. But some of the regrets that I experience include, if I wanted to put in a bucket, FOMO, of course, feeling like you're missing out on life. I spent my entire 20s working trying to set up, my future. And now, of course, we're married and we have a child. Some of the experiences that I would have had in my 20s, such as traveling or living alone, obviously will never happen again.
Right.
So there for a long time.
Traveling can, if we're realistic.
It can.
Living alone, unless you're trying to dip,
No.
But yeah, I feel like traveling you can, but I get what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
Basically, like you feel like that time has passed when you could have done the whole YOLO type of thing that people tend to do in their 20s. Right. Okay.
And that's one reason why I've always said I admired your 20s, because you did a lot of traveling. And not that we can't travel now. Obviously we have and we do, but it's a different type of travel now when you have a child.
Absolutely.
Because there's certain things
it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah. Your mind is always thinking, first of all, how's my child doing?
Right.
If they're not with you. Right. And if they're with you, there's only but so much you could do.
Yeah, it's not as freeing.
Right.
Yeah.
So there was a part of me that regretted not taking more chances growing up, being so focused on work and setting up my future that oftentimes I felt I missed out on life.
I'm curious, do you feel like the actions you took in your 20s did set up your future?
Absolutely.
Okay. Because I was going to see if there was maybe like a difference between whether you felt like those actions were successful or if they weren't, if you would still feel that regret. So that's why I asked you that. But that's good that you do feel like
I think the regret would have been here no matter what, but it would have been stronger if
your plans didn't work out.
My plans didn't work out, because it would have been, okay, now I'm regretting two things instead of regretting one thing. And what I boiled it down to is regret 9 times out of 10 is dealing with time. So the only reason why we regret things is because we feel like, going back to the examples you gave with connection, we didn't reach out at a time when we could have reached out. We wish we could go back in time to correct some kind of moral wrong. Regretting chances that we didn't take. So I boiled it down to regret being directly correlated with time. And I know for me, it in a sense paralyzed me.
That's interesting, because that's one of the things that I read about regret, because there's so many other emotions that stem from regretting things, and the amount of stress that it causes, the amount of sadness that it can cause. It makes sense that it would paralyze you. But with your statement relating regret with time, I agree with that in most cases, but not all, because I feel like time is that one thing that we know we can't get back. Right? No matter what we decide to do, what direction we decide to take, we know as humans here on Earth, our time is limited to some extent, even though we don't know when that time will end, but we know that we're not getting time back. So I agree with you, but I saw a quote that said that people tend to actually regret because it contradicts who we feel we are and who we want to be. So while yes, time is a factor, but I think similar to what you said, you wanted to be a specific type of person in your 20s and you feel like you missed out on that and that time is gone. So I feel like time and identity is correlated together.
Absolutely. I love that quote because it ties in so well to what I was experiencing. And even physically, to be quite honest with you, I've, been going to the gym off and on. I have to say that, since I was in my late teens, early 20s. And I always had in the back of my mind, I'm going to get into tip-top shape, but life gets in the way, no excuses. But it wasn't until, I think I shared this with you earlier this year or last year, where it hit me that I'm in the worst shape of my life. And
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but yes, I remember that. I'm just reminiscing on the conversation, the time.
And for those people who don't know what I look like, I'm not overweight or anything. I'm just talking about how I feel physically. Like if you had to ask me to run down the block, I would be in trouble.
Right. It would be a struggle.
Right. Like I'm getting off from playing with our daughter on the floor and I got to tell her to hold on,
Yeah. I mean, we're in our 30s. So realistically, this is the time where that tends to happen if you don't keep on that trajectory of working out consistently. Like your body starts to show you the effects of it.
Right.
Yeah.
So I always had a vision or image of what I would look like in my late 20s. And I always said that my early 30s are when I'm going to peak, physically. And I'm looking at myself and I'm in my early 30s and I'm like,
this can't be it.
I'm at the bottom of the mountain. Like I haven't even started scaling yet. So the quote that you read about regret being
contradicting to who we want to be
right,
and who we feel that we are.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that because I wasn't able to process that on my own.
Mm.
So all I knew is I wish I had done things better.
Mm-hmm.
And it led me to actually feel like, as silly as it sounds, my life is over. And that sounds like a very dramatic statement. But I had to realize that living with regret, it makes you feel like you've missed your chance and there's nothing else you can do about it.
Right. It makes you believe that that time has passed, like you said. But that's the beauty of life. Realistically, it hasn't. You can always fulfill those things. It just won't be in the exact scenario or way that you imagined it. But it is definitely still possible to revert some of those things, in my opinion.
If regret comes partly from the image that we created in our mind, then the solution would be to recreate another image.
Right.
So one thing that I've learned about regret is it's always going to be there in some way, shape, or form. I had got into the mindset of if I feel regret, it's because I did something wrong or, I'm a failure or something to that extent. I had to learn that, you know what? Regret is always going to be here to some capacity. Life happens. You'll never grow up perfect, live a perfect life, and die peacefully in your sleep. There's always going to be something that you can look back on and say, man, I wish I did, or I could have, or I should have. And I've also learned that I regret because I'm not satisfied.
I think that's most people.
Yeah. And it goes back to my answer of when you ask me if my career choices didn't work out, would I still regret? I think the reason why my answer is no is because I'm satisfied with my career. But if I wasn't satisfied, I would have absolutely regretted it. And lastly, the biggest reasons that led to my regrets are because I felt that I missed my chances.
I saw this report that stated that 82% of Americans experience regret occasionally. Many people are dealing with regret on a regular basis, and sometimes I feel like it illustrates itself in different forms. But when I saw this, my main question was, why is that? Aside from obviously regret is part of the human experience, like we're going to go through all of these emotions at some point in time. We know that. But I wonder if it's the pressure that we experience from society in this day and age of where we're supposed to be at a certain point in time, or the 20s are for experiencing and traveling before you settle down. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like society put these expectations on us. And so we go through life seeing other people have certain experiences and think, oh, I wish I did that.
Yeah.
Because we're in our 30s. Like, as much as it may feel like we've experienced life already or we've missed out on certain things, a 50-year-old would look at us like, bro, you just started living. What do you mean you can still travel with a kid or without a kid? Like, you can still do those things. And that's why I said that earlier, where although it may not be the same scenario or it may not be the way we envision it, but like you even just said in pertaining to the quote, sometimes we have to change our perception of what that image
Reimagine
is.
it.
Exactly. So I wonder if it's because of society.
I absolutely think society has a big part in it because every standard I think we set for ourselves has some kind of influence from society. Like when you think about the people who are in their late 20s or early to mid 30s who are not married.
Yeah, they're
put stressed so much about it.
Exactly. I think it's like this pressure.
Right.
Nothing's ever good enough. And I think we tend to focus too much on perfection.
Yeah.
Perfecting things and perfecting an error in your life. Because you saying that about your 20s, I'm just like, you did it right. That's how it should be. It should be your 20s. You focus on building and knowing what you want to do for your future. And then when you get to your 30s, you can be a little bit more chill. You know how many 30-year-olds now are trying to figure it out?
I was just about to say that someone who has the opposite story of me may also be dealing with regret, saying, yeah, I had all these experiences, but man, I wish I would have just settled down. So now I could, get a chance to really live. So regret That's why I say it's always going to be there.
Yeah, it's inevitable almost. I was reading the statement from Daniel H. Pink. He wrote, I believe, The Power of Regret, How Looking Backward Moves Forward is a book. And he said, regret doesn't make us weird. Regret makes us human. So it's inevitable. I think it's always going to be part of life. Whether we did take that other route or we made that other choice, I think the human in us will always assume that there was something we could have done different for a better outcome.
And I think in addition to society putting pressure that often leads us to the emotion of regret, I sort of believe that it's our body's or mind's natural response to get us to improve. So, for example...
That's interesting. I've never heard that take on it.
For example, with me, I said, what I said about my 20s, how I wish, I just enjoyed and lived life more.
Yeah.
Because I had that regret, I'm looking at my 30s completely differently now.
Now you're trying to live.
Now I'm trying to live. So I can't help but wonder or think that it's subconsciously our mind telling us, you may have missed out in the past or made a mistake or didn't take advantage of an opportunity, but you know it now. What are you going to do about it? And I think it only becomes crippling when we choose not to do anything about it.
That's really good. I never really thought about it in that way. And it's funny because I was going to ask you, what do you think the relationship between the internal reasons why we regret and the external? So like we just talked about how society puts this like unrealistic pressure, especially in our generation, I think. You got to go to school and have a career, still travel, make time for family and friends, take care of your parents, be there for your children, self-care, and all these things that are expected from us that I feel like naturally we're going to look back trying to accomplish all of these things and have some form of regret. I always tell you, I don't think we are capable of giving 110% in every avenue. At some point, somewhere is taking a little bit of a fall. Not that you can't accomplish it all, but you have to make some form of sacrifice somewhere in order to excel or put in the extra time and work in a different aspect of your life. So I wonder if the relationship between external pressure versus internal pressure is direct or indirect. Like, is it often just us? Is it more so the internal pressure of making sure that we're recognizing patterns or recognizing things in order to make improvements in the future? Because one thing that Daniel Pink actually said was regret can also make us better. And that mimics literally what you just said. So I'm curious if that pressure is sometimes good pressure.
I would say it's only good pressure when you're able to recognize exactly why you regret. And not just saying I regret doing this or not doing this, but exactly the reasoning why you regret. So I regretted not traveling more because I felt that now in my 30s with a child and more responsibilities, it's going to be not impossible, but much more difficult. So once I was able to understand, okay, this is why I had that regret. Now the next challenge is, okay, how could I travel, make it as easy as possible to the point where it's still enjoyable.
Right. Yeah, I hear you on that. What do you think your experience with regret as far as not doing much in your 20s has to do with the pressures of society, external forces versus internal pressure?
I think it led me to blame other people for my regrets.
Elaborate.
So growing up and having so many different responsibilities, not just from my family, but I was in ministry heavily. Yeah. So most of my time, a lot of my time was dedicated towards that. I naturally started looking back like if I wasn't involved in certain things and if I didn't have so much responsibilities on my family side, then it would have allowed me to have the free time to do more of what I wanted.
Got you.
So it actually made me start blaming other people for the regrets I have and not owning up to it and saying, I just didn't seize the opportunity. I blamed everyone and everyone under the sun.
Yeah.
If only this person didn't do this, if only this person didn't do that, then maybe I would have had the opportunity to travel more or to do whatever it is that I wanted. And I think that's a direct example of how external forces and internal forces come into play together to lead a person to regret. You start trying to find fault with not just yourself, but with everyone else around you.
Right. So that's the thing about regret, right? Because it leads to other emotions and other things that you end up dealing with. Like it affects you mentally, it affects you physically, it affects you emotionally. So that's why I feel like being able to recognize regret is important because it can come in different forms. It may be sadness, it may be anger, depression, it may be paralyzing or laziness. Like regret can illustrate itself in different forms because it's affecting you in such a drastic way in different aspects of your life that the emotions that it leads to, you often don't recognize the foundation of it, that it's actually just regret.
And how could someone tie in that negative emotion with regret? Because sometimes people might think to themselves, I'm upset because I got to go to work at a job that I hate, not necessarily, man, I regret not finishing school or I regret not taking a different path or something. How does someone recognize that?
I think it all starts with perspective and also self-awareness. Perspective because, like you just mentioned, an example of going to work, the person's angry about going to work, not recognizing that it's actually regret because this is not something they wanted to do. And maybe whatever it is that they're doing now was influenced by a parent, and they decided to not make a choice of their own. Like all of these things, if you keep on following the path, you'll find the root of it. So I think self-reflection and awareness is really important in identifying it, because I was reading up on some of the effects, the negative effects that it can have on us. And mentally, it can lead to depression, of course, because it's a self-inflicting emotion.
They say regret is a self-inflicting emotion?
It's a self-inflicting emotion, which is not like any of the other emotions that we experience, because you yourself are causing the emotions that stem from regret rather than other emotions. Someone can make you angry, right? Or someone can make you feel disappointed. But with regret, I actually read that it could be the most painful emotion because of the fact that it's self-inflicting.
Wow.
It can web into so many different emotions, and you don't recognize that that anger or that sadness is actually you regretting something. It can trickle into many different emotions, and physically, it actually increases the stress hormones. So naturally, it's physically making you unwell as well. So I think understanding where some of your emotions stem from is probably like a good first step. I would want to identify, why am I always angry about going to work, right? If that's the example we're using. Is it the people? Is it internal? And if it is internal, what about work is making me feel this way? And I think as you keep on asking yourself questions and becoming more self-aware, you will naturally be able to lead to whether it is regret or not.
Do you think it's, for most people, it's one emotion, or it could be a series of emotions?
I think it can definitely be a series of emotions. Imagine you're beating yourself up about a decision you made or didn't make, a risk that you took or didn't take, and you're constantly replaying that in your mind and beating yourself up about it. That can cause a variety of emotions, not just one emotion.
The reason why I ask is I noticed that my regret predominantly started as resentment for society, and it actually made me isolate myself even more. But then it quickly went from resentment to anger. It went from anger to sadness. So at the time when I was experiencing these emotions, I didn't understand that it was coming from the same thing. I just thought that different things were making me resentful, different things were making me, angry, different things were making me sad. I didn't tie together that, oh no, I'm feeling very regretful now, and it's just being released through all these negative emotions.
Right. Yeah, that's definitely a factor, because regret actually can lead to anxiety, chronic feelings of sadness, shame, anger, like you mentioned. It could physically actually cause pain because of the increase in the stress hormones. That affects our muscles, especially our heart muscle and our diaphragm, and that can sometimes lead to painful strain. So think of someone with anxiety attacks or whatever the case is. I mean, I'm not a doctor or anything, but when I researched it, it stated that the increase in the stress hormones can affect us physically in that way, where we actually do feel pain and not recognize that it's due to our regret or what's occurring emotionally. So it leads to those things among so many others. And that's why I think it's probably one of the most difficult things to identify, because you can often think you're just sad, not realizing that you're sad because of a regret, or you can be angry and not realize you're angry because of a regret. So I think recognizing regret, first, you have to do a lot of self-reflection and become more self-aware to identify some of the emotions you deal with, and then leading back to the foundation of where that started. Why do you feel it? What about this thing or this place or this person makes you feel that way? Whether it's external or internal. The example that you gave earlier, how did you identify that it was regret for you?
I would feel those negative emotions anytime I thought of the past. So the future was, although questionable, somewhat optimistic. The present was, I would describe it as calm, peaceful, thankful, grateful. But whenever I thought about the past, I found myself getting angry. So that's when I started to notice, okay, this is clearly something that happened, or a series of things that happened before, that's causing these emotions to rise up. And I have this personal exercise that I do where I don't think about what I'm going to say. I just say it. And
ooh, that's bold.
But this is, of course, in private.
Yeah.
But one of the words that came out naturally was regret.
Oh, that's good.
I found myself saying, I regret XYZ.
Yeah.
It was definitely an eye-opener for me. As I mentioned, there were periods in my life where I felt resentful, then I felt angry, then I felt sadness, and I couldn't pinpoint it to exactly what was causing it. But at that moment, I realized everything ties into regret.
That makes a lot of sense. One of the recommendations I saw was to first look inwardly, then look outwardly, then look forward. Like you said, you started to just express yourself out loud to yourself on what you were feeling and not thinking about it, not processing it, just saying what you feel. So that's a form of looking inward. One thing I would personally say that worked for me is trying not to dwell on the mistake or dwell on whatever it is that I'm regretting, but instead learning from it. So in a situation where I felt like, I should have made a different decision, I would tell myself, okay, this is the decision that was already made. We can't go back in the past and change it, right? All we can do is change the present, which will then ultimately change the future. So I started to look at certain situations and accept them, learn from them and accept them, and grow from it. What did I learn from this past experience when I did make what was a quote unquote mistake in my opinion? And how can I avoid making that mistake again?
And to add to that, one of the things that we do naturally as human beings to give energy to regret is we fantasize and romanticize that if this happened, my life would be perfect. Or
looking at what could have been, like envisioning what could have been if you made that other decision.
Thinking it would be completely life-changing. And I'm not saying that it's not, but life is going to be life no matter what you do.
Right.
So even if you had a time machine and you were able to go back and undo whatever it is that was causing your regret, there will be something else that you would most likely regret. So one of the things that I had to do is just be more realistic and tell myself, whatever it is that I'm regretting, chances are it wouldn't make or break my life.
Right.
But if I choose to dwell on it, it's negatively influencing my life, and it can make or break my life.
Right. I agree. I love that. Sometimes I think we get in our own way. So it's good to hear someone who knows us and cares about us give us some constructive criticism on how we're dealing with it or how we're looking at it. Maybe we need to look at it from a different perspective, and that can come from a loved one letting us know what that perspective could be, then finding a way to fill that void.
I love what you said earlier about us being in our 30s and a 50-year-old looking at us like, what are you talking about? You have so much more to live for. And realistically, I could imagine a 70-year-old looking at a 50-year-old and saying the same thing. Thinking the same thing. So more opportunities are going to come your way. And use your wisdom to not only seize on those opportunities, but to make it better than if you were to do it earlier in your life. I got over the FOMO of traveling because I saw that I was in a position where now when I do travel is 100 times more meaningful than if I had done it before.
Quality.
Right. So learning that whatever you may have regretted in the past or you wish you had done in the past, you can somehow use your increased knowledge and wisdom to not just have that experience, but to make it better than it would have been before.
Exactly. I think that's a great example of filling that void, recognizing that you can still fulfill some of these things. It just won't be the same exact imagination that you had at the time.
You'll find yourself losing that emotion of regret once you find a benefit or once you find something positive. If you're just sitting at home and basking in the shoulda, coulda, wouldas, you're naturally always going to feed that energy.
Right.
But if you're finding ways to make your regret a learning experience,
right, it's an opportunity to grow.
Right. It's an opportunity to grow, and you'll find yourself regretting less and less, to the point where I've said this to you before, where I've learned that when something happens that I may regret or I may wish never happened, I've learned to adopt the mindset, I'm glad that this happened.
Mm-hmm.
And there are times, obviously, where I'm really not happy it happens.
Mm-hmm.
But I found that when you have that mindset, I'm glad this happened, it naturally leads you to something better.
Right. It's all about perspective. In this situation, I feel like perspective is key. Recognizing that some things you actually can go back and change it. So again, look inward, look outward, look forward, practice self-compassion, express yourself, gain a lesson. Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noir Poise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.